Hello, this is Shane McGlynn of IRM UK, and welcome to this webinar with Adrian Reed of Blackmetric Business Solutions on helping stakeholders to take a step back and avoid the solution illusion. We welcome your input and questions, and now over to you, Adrian.
Okay, thank you, Shane, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world for the attendees on the webinar. So my presentation today is focusing on helping our stakeholders, our organisations to take a step back and avoid those patterns and those situations that can occur when projects solutionise too early on in the project life cycle. Now I hazard a guess that probably everyone dialed into this call has at some point in their career worked on a project where perhaps a decision over the solution was made very early on in the project. That might be an IT solution, so perhaps someone fell in love with a particular package and there was this dogged determination to deliver that against all the odds. Or it might have been some other type of solution. The point is that if organisations, stakeholders, projects don't spend the time and resource to really thoroughly understand the business situation, the business need, the business problem or the business opportunity, then really what we're falling into is a trap where the solution is unlikely to actually meet our needs. And that's the pattern I'm going to refer to as the solution illusion throughout this presentation. Now, I'm going to cover this from three angles. There are three parts to the presentation today. I'm going to start by talking about what the solution illusion is and why it matters. And I'm going to do that through the lens of a fairly well publicised UK government project. And I'll talk about some research and some information that I've gleaned on that project. I'm also going to talk about how, as business analysts, as project managers, testers, change professionals, whatever you happen to be, how we might know that this pattern is occurring. So how can we spot the solution illusion? I'm then going to move on to talk about how can we as change practitioners, as business analysts, how can we help our stakeholders to take a step back? So if someone has fallen in love with a particular solution, or if a project has so much momentum, but it's pursuing the wrong solution, or it might not be pursuing the right solution, what sort of tools and techniques can we use to maintain rapport with our stakeholders, but offer them that proactive, critical challenge? And one of the techniques I'm going to talk about is how to develop a one-page project concept document that really wraps up the aims and goals of the project so we can create debate amongst our stakeholders, but also ensure that they're on the same page. Now, this is going to be a fairly quick whistle-stop tour in the webinar. I am exploring these themes during the Business Analysis Conference Europe as well. So if you are attending the conference in September, do come see me and we can talk about these themes a bit more too. There will be some time for questions and answers at the end. What I would say is please do type your questions in as they occur to you. You should have a sort of question box to the right-hand side of your webinar screen. If you have a question, comment, type it in. What that will do is it will queue up as a question and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Okay, so we're going to start by asking the question, why does it matter? What can happen if we solutionise on a project too early? What happens if our projects, our stakeholders are blindsided by this solution illusion? And I'm going to transport you to a slightly different place. And we're going to talk about the fire and rescue service. Or to be more specific, we're going to talk about a government-run project which involved the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Some of you, if you regularly sort of watch the news or whatever, may have heard of this case study already. There was a project, a UK government-run project called the UK Fire Control Project. Now, to give you some context, this project was initiated in 2004, and its purpose was around rationalising the way that 999 emergency calls were dealt with, dispatched, and how fire engines were dispatched from control centres. So prior to this project there were something like 40 or 50 dispersed control rooms, and the project was aiming to consolidate this into 8 or 9 regional control rooms. Now, this was a really wide-ranging program with business change impact, but there was quite a focus on the IT. And actually, what the research, the case study, the information that's been released to the Public Accounts Committee shows is it certainly appears like there was quite an early decision made on rationalising the IT and implementing one unified IT system to solve this problem. Now, for those of you that have been following the news, you may well know that actually the project was initiated in 2004. It was cancelled 6 years later. Now, what's particularly interesting about this project is it was cancelled, and the government's own reports show that precisely 0 of the project's objectives were met. So 6 years worth of work and no objectives met. Now, the great thing about projects like this, projects that fail in the public sector, okay, great's the wrong word, interesting thing about projects that fail in the public sector is there will often be an inquiry, they'll often be taken to the Public Accounts Committee, and so there's quite a lot of information out there about what happened. And because I'm a bit of a project geek, I've spent some time digging through not just the reports, but also verbal evidence, written evidence that was given to committees, etc., to try and sort of establish what could have happened here. Now, the first thing that becomes quite clear when you start to dig in beyond the reports into some of the verbal evidence that was given to the committees about this project is it appears that there was confusion and differing views over what this project was trying to achieve. Put simply, it appears that there was significant differences over the question, what problem are we trying to solve here? If you look at some stakeholders' viewpoints, they were talking about things like resilience. So making sure that if one control room was offline for whatever reason, that calls could be routed elsewhere. There were other stakeholders talking about interoperability, so the ability for disparate IT systems to talk to each other. You had others talking about regionalisation and a change in business architecture. But then you had some of the chief fire officers saying, actually, this project isn't about any of those things. The primary objective here is about firefighter safety. It's about providing information in the cab of the fire engine which can help protect our firefighters. So it appears that actually there were different stakeholders with different worldviews. Not only this, but the reports and the evidence suggest that the project team didn't engage with people within the fire and rescue service early enough, or didn't engage with them in the right way. To give you a sort of soundbite around that, if you will, it suggests that actually, although the project was initiated in 2004, work on end-user requirements didn't start till 2009, which was a year before the project was cancelled. So there perhaps wasn't the engagement, there wasn't a shared view of vision, there wasn't the engagement. Not only that, the report, the evidence also shows that the solution was imposed. It was seen and very much appears to be an imposed solution. And the representatives of the project are on record as saying that actually, in retrospect, it was not appropriate for the needs of the country anyway. It was significantly over-engineered. It wasn't necessarily going to deliver the benefits that we thought it was in retrospect. The project was cancelled in 2010 with none of the original objectives achieved. Now the punchline, if there were a punchline to this story, is the cost. And the estimate of the minimum amount of money which will have been wasted by this project by the time it's wound up was £460 million. Now, That's a big number, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to let that sink in. But to put that in context, £460 million is enough to pay the wages of around about 1,500 firefighters for a decade. I would not like to be the senior responsible officer that is in front of the Public Accounts Committee explaining this project failure. Not only that, we're in a situation where some of the regional control centres that were built are empty. And one of the reasons they're empty is they were built to a very high specification and they have high facilities management costs. And there are fire and rescue authorities that want to move into them but can't afford the ongoing costs. So it's an epic project failure, and it's a project failure by the government's own admission. One of the key reasons there is this early solutionisation and the confusion over objectives, or the apparent confusion over objectives. Now, I wouldn't want to oversimplify this project. There were a lot of other contributing factors, and there's a load of really interesting reports and information. So, if you're interested in these sorts of things, drop me an email. There's some stuff that you'll be fascinated by. But certainly, a contributing factor is that early solutionisation. So, when I'm talking about the solution illusion, I'm talking about something that occurs when an early, overly prescriptive solution is chosen or imposed without that understanding of the business need, problem, or opportunity. And that can happen when perhaps a project just needs to get going. I mean, I'm sure everyone on this call has worked on a project where there's just been a desire to get going, and we're kind of saying, well, actually we need to know what the problem is, but there's just this momentum and it's really hard to get people to take a step back. The reality, of course, is that a solution without a problem really is just an illusion. And sometimes what people are looking for is that illusion of progress. They want the project to kick off, they want something to happen, and stopping and taking stock and doing analysis, that feels like wasted time. Sometimes people are looking for a magic bullet, and they come across a solution that they feel is going to solve the world's ills. There might be a magic bullet out there. I haven't worked on a single project where project teams have found one, so I think project teams need to be cautious about those sorts of stories too. But fundamentally, it comes down to the fact that if we don't, as a project team, know what problem we're trying to solve, we'll never really know whether the solution we implemented actually solved it. And if there's confusion over objectives and why we're doing the project, then we're just setting the project up for failure and and potential high-profile failures like the one we've mentioned. So that's what the solution illusion is, and that's why it's important. It can lead to these sort of project implosions, if you like. So as analysts, as change professionals, what might the warning signs be? What might we need to keep an eye out for? Well, I'm going to give you now some sort of quotes, some vox pops, if you like, of things that I've certainly heard on projects that I've worked on. And I'm sure many of you will have heard these things too. And these are signs or warning signs that perhaps there's been some early solutionisation. The first one, we don't have any time for feasibility work. Now, I can't see the audience, obviously, but I'm guessing a few people might have smiled, had a sort of knowing smile when you saw that one. And it's often the case, isn't it? As analysts we're saying, look, we need to understand the problem, but we're sort of driven straight into that detailed requirement space. And that's a sign that perhaps there's been an early decision made over a solution, and now we're being just asked to write requirements with that one solution in mind. So if there's no time, it's worth finding out why, what's driving that time frame. Another warning sign, it's a simple IT-only project. So someone's wanting to implement a piece of kit, a server, an application or whatever, and it's seen as a simple IT-only project. We don't need to get involved with business, it's just, it's lift and drop. Possibly, but famous last words. And finally, a personal favourite of mine, and I know that a few people on this call will have a wry smile when they see this one. it's an off-the-shelf solution, so I presume we won't need any requirements. And the reality, of course, is as BAs, as business analysts, we know even if you buy a best-in-class solution off of the shelf, you need to know what you're using it for. And it's incredibly unlikely that you're going to buy an off-the-shelf solution that just happens to be configured to work perfectly with your business processes, that your users already know how to use, and fits perfectly within your existing IT infrastructure. So again, even off-the-shelf solutions are going to require some analysis, and we need to know what the problem is. We need to not jump on that solution too quickly. So we need to keep an ear out for these things. Those are warning signs. At its most blunt, if you like, and I'm sure a few of us will have been in situations like this too. You might have a sponsor, a project manager, a senior stakeholder who pretty much just says something like, well, do you know what? We already know what we want. There's no time for any analysis anyway. So go away and deliver the thing. Sometimes this is referred to as the JDI School of Project Management. Just do it. Don't ask any questions, just deliver it. And as business analysts, when we're in that situation, we probably sort of retire into a corner and think, oh gosh, not again. You know, first of all, it was the National Programme for IT, a £10 billion waste of fund next to the UK fire control, and now we're on in the same loop again. So it's worth watching out for these things. But of course the million-dollar question is, what can we do to prevent it? How can we help our stakeholders to take that step back to think more holistically? But before we do that, I want to take a bit of a reality check. Because up until this point, you probably think I've been painting a picture of our bad stakeholders who think in sort of solution speak, and that's an appalling thing, and us business analysts sort of sit there in our ivory towers. And the reality is, it's absolutely not like that. And I think it's important that we don't get too purist about this. And I'm going to say something now which might be a little bit controversial, but I think it's one of those unspoken BA secrets that we probably whisper to each other at BA parties but don't let our stakeholders hear. And that is, when you look at it in the light of day, don't we all think in solutions? So when we ask our stakeholders to think in a really abstract way, maybe we're asking them to take a logical leap too far. Now, what really brought this home to me, and I'm going to tell you a bit of a story, go off on a bit of a tangent, but then I'll bring it back in. What really brought this home to me was when I bought a car. So very recently I bought a newer car. I'm not a petrol head, I don't particularly like driving, but I have to have a car to get around. And my car was getting old, rusty, so I thought I'd treat myself to a newer one. Anyway, I'd pretty much got my heart settled on a new shape VW Beetle. So I was looking for a sort of 2007-8 Volkswagen Beetle, probably in blue. And I was explaining this to one of my colleagues who is quite into cars. And he was sort of saying, well, why on earth are you going for the Volkswagen Beetle? You know, what do you need to use the car for? How often do you use it? You know, how many people do you need to carry? What kind of boot space do you need? How much power do you want? And I suddenly realised when he was asking me these sorts of requirements-based questions that I'd just done exactly what I'm always sort of lambasting stakeholders for doing. And when I really thought this through, and I'm rather embarrassed to admit this, but I'm going to admit it on a public webinar anyway, one of the reasons that I was considering a Volkswagen Beetle is because it has a vase on the dashboard. And I quite liked the idea of being able to drive to my meetings with a flower in there or chuck my change in there or whatever. And I know there'll be a few people laughing at that ridiculous idea, so do take some humour from that. But once I'd been challenged in this way, I thought, yeah, no, it's interesting, and I changed. I didn't get a VW Beetle, I got a different car. But the point is, you know, I'm a business analyst. I'm sure there are many business analysts on this call, and we don't tend to approach buying things in our own personal lives in the same way as we expect our stakeholders to in projects. I don't think I know a single person who, when they want a car, start by specifying that they need a method of transportation for humans which can be operated by a suitably qualified human and can carry 3 human passengers whilst also carrying shopping and or luggage. It's just not the way we think, right? And once you sort of start to think about that, thinking in solutions is natural. So although we need to get our stakeholders to take a step back and to maximise the number of solutions that they think about so we don't solutionize too early, we also need to take that pragmatic approach that actually this is probably just the way people think. And it's about helping make sure we get the right outcome, that we deliver the business value that's really important. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to talk about some tools, some techniques and ideas that can help us to dodge that solution illusion, dodge that sort of dogged determination to pursue a particular solution without too much forethought. And one concept that it's worth thinking about throughout the project lifecycle is the difference between divergent and convergent thinking. If you think about projects, it doesn't matter whether it's a software project, a manufacturing project, whatever, there will be times in the project where we are asking our stakeholders, and as BAs, we're often in that facilitation role, so we're facilitating idea generation or whatever. And in that facilitative role, we're sometimes asking our stakeholders to think in a divergent way, to maximise the number of ideas or whatever. We're asking them to come up with 100 possible solutions, which we can later prioritise. At other times in the project, we'll be wanting to nail things down. We'll be wanting things to converge. So, for example, when defining a problem, we'll be wanting divergent thinking. We're going to want to eventually get a laser-like pin focus on what that problem is. But when we're thinking about potential solutions for that problem, initially we're going to want to diverge. We're going to want as many creative ideas as we can. We don't just want someone to say, there's a software solution that does that. There may be many software solutions. There may be manual processes. It may be an organizational change could solve it. It might be that retraining users might solve the problem. The thing about idea generation is there is a propensity to jump on the first viable, affordable solution. So if we're generating potential solutions, if we're brainstorming or whatever, when something that works comes up, people tend to latch onto it. The danger with that is that that might be one of only 10 possible solutions. And if we kept brainstorming that bit longer, we might have got a better one. So just keeping this in mind throughout our projects is useful. And many stakeholders I've worked with some stakeholders who really like this model and really like the idea of, right, this is the time for divergence, this is the time for convergence. You can use it as a kind of metaphor within your projects. If you like this model, then if you Google the double diamond model, which is, I think it's the UK Design Council have a useful website with more information about stuff like this on, so do take a look. Okay, so we can think about divergent, convergent thinking. Another important thing is the big 3 questions. These are the 3 questions that as business analysts we ask a lot. We ask all sorts of questions, but these are 3 of the most important. And often when we're talking about the purpose of a project, when we're initiating a project or wanting to understand the broader business need and context, we'll be asking the why questions. So typically pre-project at the beginning of projects we'll be really wanting to understand why. What's the problem here? What's the opportunity? Why is this project being run? Is it to reduce costs, avoid costs, improve service? Is it a regulatory project? Knowing those broad objectives and the business need enables us to drill down into what we as BAs tend to call requirements. So you understand the sort of broad objectives, then we nail down our requirements based on our current state, where we want to get to, and they could be functional requirements, non-functional, they could be process requirements, whatever. And at some point someone needs to do some design and actually figure out how the thing is going to be implemented on a system, in a process, or design, or whatever. Now, the sort of well-trodden way of thinking about this is that, to start with the why, move to the what, then the how. And that fits in quite nicely with a typical waterfall project life cycle, or the way that waterfall is typically presented, should I say. And that works, and it's definitely optimal to start with an understanding of the why, and then move on to the what, then to the how. That's optimal and it's lovely. And if you work in an organisation that you can do that, then I'd love to know, because that sounds lovely. The reality is that actually these things overlap, and when we're working on a project, we're probably going to have to do a bit of all of these things at different times. And it's definitely not as linear as perhaps it's presented here. An important thing to note is, if a stakeholder comes to us with a solution rather than a problem, then we've gone straight in at the how stage. But much like we can chunk down that logical ladder from why to what to how, it's possible, it's not as optimum, it's not as good, but we can also chunk up. So if someone, for argument's sake, says, right, well, what I want to do is I want to implement XYZ software system, we can sort of start to de-engineer the requirements from that. Again, not optimal, but it's a way of getting there. It's a way of keeping that rapport with stakeholders. We might ask questions like, oh, right, okay, what features of that software package are most valuable to you? What features of that software package will you and your users use the most? What features doesn't that software package have that you'll need? Which business processes will that software package interact with? Will it interface with any other software packages? And these sorts of things. And they are solution-based questions, so that isn't pure. It's not a pure form of analysis by any means. But it gets us up to the level where you could imagine drawing a high-level use case diagram, you could imagine writing requirements, or starting to understand where the gaps are. You could take it one step further by understanding, if we get a use case diagram, a requirements catalogue, whatever, a set of use case narratives, whilst you're having that discussion, you can also start to interject with the why. What's driving your need for that requirement? Is this about improving service? Is it about avoiding costs? What will the organisation look like after we implement this project? What are its drivers? Now, the advantage to asking the why questions either with the what or after, if we're starting with a solution, is if we go straight in for the kill. If we are presented with that statement where a stakeholder says, right, what I want is XYZ software system, and we immediately say why, what we're likely to get is potentially quite a blunt retort like, who are you to ask me that, I'm the CEO, or whatever it happens to be. By climbing the ladder, by climbing that logical ladder, we can get there in a slightly subtler way, but we still get there. Now, clearly there's all sorts of governance questions there. It may be that you have to have a business case anyway, but if you are really stuck in that situation where a stakeholder is giving you a solution and you've just got to work with what you've got, then that's a way of working up the ladder. Now, the interesting thing is when we get to the why and the what, we can then validate whether that solution is actually fit for what they need it to do. And that opens the door for some more divergent thinking about what other solutions there might be. So we can start to get out of that solution illusion trap by climbing that logical ladder. So what we're talking about here is really the discipline of problem analysis. And what we've talked about in that last slide is how to get away from the solution illusion if we land on a project and it's already happening. In the IIBA's Business Analysis Body of Knowledge, there's a knowledge area called Enterprise Analysis, which covers a lot of the sorts of things we're going to talk about and have been talking about. And ideally, we would start this stuff pre-project. So although what I've just talked about is the pragmatic reality of starting a project where a decision's already been made and trying to unravel that, the ideal situation would be for us to have some engagement beforehand. I mean, arguably, unless you know what the problem is, you haven't really got a project, because how can a project have been initiated? And it can be really useful if we do have that opportunity to get early engagement, or even if we start on a project and we feel there's divergence of views on what the project is about, of developing a simple one-page project concept summary. This is about getting people on the same page early. If you think back to our UK fire control project, one of the problems appears to be a difference of views about what the project was for. So you'd ask how that project could have ever have succeeded if at least one of those stakeholders was going to be disappointed. Using something like this at least highlights those differences of opinion early so that the project can take corrective action. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what a one-page project concept summary can look like. Then I'm going to talk through a couple of techniques that we can use to actually populate it. Now the slide I'm about to show you I don't think will look very good over GoToWebinar because it's got some graphics on and it's normally an A4 sheet. But just sort of, it will show you the context and we'll come back to it. In fact, that's the next slide, apologies. Before I preempt myself, what we're talking about with the project concept summary is taking a thin slice of the why, the what and the how. So that logical ladder I was talking about, it's like saying, right, here's a little bit of the why. Okay, the feasibility study, the business case, whatever we create, that will really start to articulate the why in more detail. But here's enough for us to be on the same page about why we're doing this. Also, here's a little thin slither of what we might need. We're not talking detailed business requirements, we're talking just boundaries, scope, these sorts of things. And also a thin slice of how. So here are 10 options that might solve this problem. We haven't investigated any of them, but there are some solutions. So that thin slice can be articulated on a single sheet like this. Now, this would normally be sort of printed out on an A4 or an A3 sheet. Now, it has several sections on there. You can see there's a problem or opportunity statement, there's benefits and measures of success, there's some conceptual business requirements, there's a sort of indicative function scope around a business use case diagram, there's links to other documents. I know it's not particularly legible, so we'll come back to this and I'll talk about each section in turn in a second, but I just wanted to give you a flavour of what we're aiming for here. Now, one of the most useful, or a very useful technique for getting stakeholders on the same page about what problem we're really trying to solve here, so that we can have a more holistic conversation about potential solutions, and so that we can avoid that solution illusion trap, is to articulate the problem as a problem statement. This is a really underutilized and underrated technique in my opinion. I love it. I start virtually every project I work on like this. And you can write a problem statement in half a page. You could probably cram it onto a 6x4 index card. You write it by saying the problem of some kind of problem is affecting a bunch of stakeholders somewhere, the impact of which is some desperately negative impact, and a successful solution would deliver some kind of benefit. Now, at first glance, this looks really simple. And the fact that it is simple is part of its beauty. It is concise and precise. And although it's simple, it isn't simplistic, and it's not easy to elicit. So it takes quite a lot of effort to elicit a good problem statement. And part of the value is people will argue over the wording. but they're arguing over the wording at the earliest point of the project, hopefully. And if you think about it, the 4 questions we're asking there are, what problem are we trying to solve here? So we can get, in a couple of sentences, a high-level agreement on what the problem is. That's a really good start. Even if we pick up a project and we feel there isn't that unification, just getting that couple of sentences is great. The debate that it can create is really useful, and we'll end up with something that is concise and precise. By talking about who it's affecting, we're really thinking about who our stakeholders are. Now remember back to the UK fire control project, one of the things which the report shows is that actually some of the people within the fire and rescue service weren't engaged, weren't brought into the project at the right time. By thinking about that earlier, perhaps that would have encouraged some further stakeholder analysis. Clearly this isn't the only stakeholder analysis that would need to be done on any project, but it's a start. We know who cares about the project, who it's affecting. By thinking about the impact, we're asking the question, why should we care? Because let's face it, there are probably some problems, some niggles in organisations that are undeniable, and if we had unlimited time, resources and money, we'd probably solve them, but actually they're never going to be solved unless we have a huge injection of funds. So knowing the size of the impact is really important, or the size of the prize if this is an opportunity. And by talking about what a successful solution would look like, we're talking about the benefits. What benefits would this thing bring? Or put another way, how do we know when it's done? How do we know when this problem is solved? You can also reframe a problem statement as an opportunity statement. So you can say the opportunity of would benefit some stakeholders, the impact of which is whatever. And I know some organisations hate the word problem, and every problem is an opportunity and such forth. So you can reframe things if there's, if every curse is a blessing and these sorts of things. So I'm going to run through a really quick example of a problem statement to show you how it can work. And again, I need to transport us into a fictional world. So let's imagine we're all BAs working for a mail order retail firm. The kind of place where you get a catalogue every quarter or whatever, you ring up, you place your order, and it comes through, in the post. And on a Friday night, the marketing team have set up a new TV advert to promote a great new offer. And the marketing manager is looking at his dashboard on Saturday morning, and he's really happy because customers are loving this offer. They're ringing in dozens and dozens and dozens. And by lunchtime, they're ringing in their hundreds. So the marketing manager's really happy. And then all of a sudden, the phone lines become overloaded, the system crashes, and the phone lines are jammed, and no one can place any further orders. On Monday morning, we sheepishly come into the office, and we're summoned to the marketing manager's office. And he bangs his fist on the desk and says, "We need more phone lines in our call centre." And we take a look at that and we think, okay, well, you could do that. There's an infrastructure project there. You probably need more people too, as well as the phone lines, and you need more equipment, more PCs. You might need another office. And actually that sounds a bit like a silver bullet. It sounds a bit like you pounced on one solution and that we're not getting to the root cause. So let's do a bit more digging. And let's assume we're able to convince him to sit in on a brainstorming session. And perhaps we sit in with him and some of his colleagues, and we try to really get to the problem, and we just spend a few hours writing a problem statement. We debate it, and we get to a problem statement. Perhaps that reads something like, the problem of congested and busy phone lines. Okay, so the problem isn't that we need more phone lines, the problem is around demand, it's around congestion. The problem of congested and busy phone lines. We then ask who it affects. We know it affects our customers, but maybe through this conversation the operations manager says actually it also really affects our call centre staff. Because if we're having to take hundreds of calls, they can't take breaks. So we've identified another stakeholder group immediately. Of course, we need to do more stakeholder analysis, but we know this from up front. The impact of which is we lose potential sales as customers can't get through. Now the really cool thing about that is we've started to think about some of the metrics, or you could almost start to derive some of the metrics which might appear in a business case from that. We've started to think about why the project's necessary. So we've got the problem, what problem we're trying to solve, but also what the impact is, what the sort of metrics we might measure it by. We've got a starting point. And a successful solution will enable customers to get information and make purchases quickly without holding, leading to increased revenues and profits. Now, I've never worked in a sort of retail catalogue company, but probably all of us on the call here, having deconstructed the problem in that way, can see that actually more phone lines might be a solution, but just by deconstructing it, you can start to imagine other ones, like a website or accepting, accepting orders over mobile app or whatever. So it enables us to nail that problem down so that we can start to think of other solutions. And by taking stakeholders through that thinking process opens up their minds to other solutions in some cases. Okay, so we've got our problem statement. So we're starting to really tap into the why. Why is the project necessary? And we're helping our stakeholders. We're kind of steering them away gently with rapport away from pouncing on that solution, that illusion of solution. Well, a problem statement is a good start. Another technique that can be really useful is to take that problem statement and think about the critical success factors and key performance indicators that you'd measure project success by. So a critical success factor is a generally qualitative statement, so you can't directly measure a critical success factor. It might be something like we know we need to have really quick customer service or whatever it happens to be, or really good customer service. And you attach key performance indicators to that. So you might attach a key performance indicator saying that we want to have, the number of people who rate us as excellent, or the length of time people wait for their orders, or whatever it happens to be. Now the challenge about eliciting critical success factors and key performance indicators is if you ask your stakeholders for them, they might give you a couple. So it can be quite useful to refer to the good old balanced business scorecard. I'm sure many of you will have seen this before. It was created by Kaplan and Norton, I think, in the late 80s, if my memory serves me correctly. And it was designed for use on a macro level, on a whole organisation. But it works equally well on an individual project. So if you imagine putting that problem statement in the middle, we can then ask our stakeholders, right, okay, financially, what will this organisation look like when the project succeeds? Do we increase revenue? Is it about avoiding costs? However, it's important not to just focus on the financial aspects. So we'd also ask, what will customers say about us once we solve this problem or opportunity? Is there better customer service? If so, how do we measure that? Do people wait on the phone less? Are there any internal processes that we'll need to excel at? If we are the mail order retail company, do we also have to have excellent logistics? If so, how do we measure that? How's that, if it's relevant for the project, how do we measure it? Is it through returns or whatever? The final part of the Balanced Business Scorecard, which is, I think in the original version was called learning, it's often called innovation. I've sort of embellished it here a bit to call it innovation or sustain. What I mean by that is, what do we need to do to sustain this opportunity, or to sustain a situation where this problem stays solved? For example, there would be no point us implementing a solution to the sort of fictional case study we've just talked about, the mail order retail company, if the next time our marketing director launches an offer, the same thing happens. We'd want a solution that's flexible. So the sustain, the innovation, is about how do we stay how do we sustain this opportunity? How do we make sure the problem stays solved? And you'll probably find that you brainstorm out a whole load of critical success factors, KPIs, you refine them over a period of time. Now, another really interesting thing about this is if you're in an organisation that requires business cases, so if you're doing this pre-project, all of these things work really well and dovetail really neatly with the business case. Those KPIs might feed into your cost-benefit analysis with a little bit more finessing. If you're in an organisation that doesn't do business cases and perhaps you're encouraging stakeholders to think in more of a business case way, this is a way of starting to introduce that discipline by stealth. Because actually we're starting to think about the benefits without necessarily directly labelling them as benefits. So it's just another logical step away. So by this point we'll have our problem statement, we'll know why we are running the project, we'll know roughly what those benefits are, what the KPIs are. So we've got a pretty good view of the why. Now, unfortunately time is limited on this webinar, so those are the two sort of techniques I can talk about in detail. What we could also do to get that thin slice is start to think about what the requirements are. Now a technique, a really sort of intuitive technique that stakeholders often love is a technique called roles and goals. Again, I'll be talking about roles and goals at the conference in September, so if you're there, come see me, we'll chat about it. And essentially that's a way of brainstorming out, who's interested in this problem domain? Who might be the users? Who are the stakeholders? What do they need to do? And you can revise that into a business use case diagram. For those of you that are familiar with UML, the business use case diagram is an extension of UML, which doesn't have a system boundary, so it's a much higher level. And we might also write just some conceptual requirements, so requirement statements about what must happen, but at that really high level. We'll also be able to brainstorm out solution options, so that divergent thinking again. What might the solutions be? And that might be software, it might be hardware, it might be business process re-engineering, it might be organizational change, it might be training staff. And all of those things feed into the project concept summary. So to bring back that template, that example I showed earlier, and to add a bit more meat to it now, what we have on that one page, although it looks clean, it looks relatively lightweight, we have our problem statement, which says what problem we're trying to solve. It gives us a bit of a clue about the stakeholders. We know we need to do further stakeholder analysis, but it gives us a clue. And it ensures we're all on the same page. It's got that precision with conciseness as well. We've also got our critical success factors and KPIs. And in this example, I've used a mind map to illustrate them so you can see it's visual. That's just a personal choice. You could draw them however you want, or just as textual statements. That enables us to ensure that everyone thinks we're aiming for the same thing. So we've now got consensus over the problem statement and that we're aiming for the same thing. We may have other requirements, as we mentioned just previously. Our conceptual level requirements are a handful that we put in there. We've got a business use case diagram showing our roles and goals. So, who's involved with this problem domain, what do they need to do? We will list out any possible solutions just briefly. By the way, we're not talking about evaluating those solutions yet. This is just saying that, look, there are some solutions out here and here are some of them. And we come up with some recommended next steps, which if we're doing this pre-project would probably be some more digging in terms of requirements, solutions, etc. And of course we may well link out to other documents too, like risk log or whatever. Now this is extremely valuable done pre-project. There's still value in doing it during a project if we get into that solution illusion trap, because it's a way of chunking down that or up that logical ladder again, really thinking about the problem. And the great thing is, once it's done, you've got that artifact that you can refer back to. And because it's a single page, it's something that people can latch onto. Clearly, all of these things require elaboration through business cases, requirements, documents, whatever, but it can be a bit of a guiding beacon and can be read in conjunction with documents like the PID or project charter or whatever. So in summary, a lack of problem analysis affects our projects and can lead to the solution illusion. It means that we haven't got that view on what problem we're trying to solve, and as history has shown us, that can lead to some pretty epic project misfortune. However, it is completely natural for people to think in solutions, and we all do it. The important thing is to help our stakeholders take a step back. And some of the techniques we've looked at today, the problem statement, critical success factors, KPIs, the project concept, convergent, divergent thinking, the big three, can help us with that. So it's about utilising those tools and really building rapport with our stakeholders, but challenging them when we need to. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope you found it useful. And Shane, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Adrian. Some questions here for you. One where, is there a case where a project could have multiple problem statements, from Nick?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I would tend my gut answer to that is you can think about the problems at different levels of abstraction, and it is desirable to have a problem statement which is written at a level that covers the entire project. So a typical BA answer, yes and no. You could have separate problem statements, but that probably means you're delving down into perhaps a specific like work stream or a specific problem area. If you do that, what I would think would be best would be to have one high-level problem statement which you put on the project concept, and then perhaps delve down into different work streams, work packages, or whatever. You could imagine actually kicking off work streams with a particular problem statement for that work stream or whatever. So, you definitely can, but I think it's better to have one at project level.
Thanks, Adrian. I have some questions direct to me as well. We'll start with, what can we do if the CEO themselves falls in love with a particular IT system and simply instructs us to implement it without any further analysis, even when we argue that it's absolutely critical? As a BA, we wouldn't normally have authority to challenge someone so senior.
Yeah. I mean, a real challenge. And I mean, what I would say there is, in terms of us as the BA not having the authority, I'm about to say something which is an awful cliche, but although it's a cliche, it's sort of true. Authority is taken and not given. And what I mean by that is, actually, I would take the view that as business analysts, it's almost our professional duty to ensure that decision makers have the information they need to make good quality project decisions. So if we see a CEO is about to make a really bad decision because they've fallen in love with a solution and perhaps they're not close enough to the business problem, then I would still encourage whoever asked that question to speak to the CEO, or if they can't speak directly, to speak to one of their trusted colleagues, the CEO's trusted colleagues, and essentially say, look, it's absolutely your decision, you're signing the checks, but just so you know, that solution won't necessarily solve your problem. And if you're happy with that, then I'll stop making noise, but I need you to know this. So it's about providing people with options. And there will be times, and I'm sure we've all on the call had this, where someone with a high level of power like that looks at a risk or looks at something we say and says, hear what you're saying, understand it, but we're going to go in this direction anyway. And in that regard, I think we've done our job, and then we need to support the delivery of whatever they're progressing. But until we've raised it up, we should do so. We should make sure that they've got that information.
Thank you. And another question. What can we do if we join a project that's in flight with requirements gathering already taking place, where the objectives aren't clear and a predetermined solution has already been chosen? We wouldn't have the luxury of stopping and reflecting, so how can we get closer to the reason why the project is necessary without being seen to slow things down or take a step backwards?
Okay, that's a really good question too, and so whoever raised it, I think that the key thing that is in that question is we mustn't be seen to slow the project down. So if requirements analysis is ongoing, it might be that we need to do some of this stuff alongside it. So it's almost a two-pronged approach. So perhaps we carry on with the requirements analysis so that the current project schedule isn't affected, but maybe we encourage our stakeholders just to do a quick problem statement. Or maybe we just start to climb that logical ladder from the how to the what, and then we just make that connection to the why. And in doing this, what we might find is that if we get people around the table to talk about the problem statement, it creates a debate. And if the stakeholders themselves see that they're on different pages, then it might be them that puts a pause on the project until that that difference is reconciled. And what that also does is it opens up the conversation to say, well, actually, maybe this isn't the only solution. If we're putting a pause on, if we're refocusing, resetting, shall we look at some other solutions too? So we can drive things in that way. But the techniques we've talked about today, they can be used on in-flight projects too. But in the real world, in reality, we may need to take that two-pronged approach so that we keep rapport and we're not seen to be blocking things.
Wonderful, thanks. Another question, Adrian. Isn't scope the responsibility of the project manager? Shouldn't the project manager be creating the project concept document?
Ooh, controversial. I think scope is the responsibility of everyone on the project, if I'm honest. And I think as BAs we are always involved with scope because we help with prioritization, we elicit requirements, we analyse and document them. So scope is a shared responsibility. In terms of the project concept document, it's even more powerful if we can work alongside a PM, for sure. I think that the reality is, if this is done pre-project, there might not even be a project manager assigned yet. Because if we're involved right when someone's thinking about a potential project, there may be no PM there. So I do see the project concept as being a BA deliverable, but if it can be done in conjunction with the PM, that's even better. But scope, shared responsibility for sure.
Wonderful. We have a question from Reinhard who's asking, isn't the concept summary some kind of approval document?
Yes, it could be. So I've seen one organisation use a very similar version of this. Just before I sort of distilled it down onto a single page, but we're using it as essentially the first part of their project approval process, where almost to get any seed funding, if you like, to do any investigation or to spend time doing feasibility, there needed to be a project concept. And it wasn't intended to be heavyweight, but it was about saying, look, before we spend 2 weeks doing further digging, let's make sure that there's something here. Let's spend a couple of days. So it can definitely be part of the approval process, without doubt.
Wonderful. One more question. In my organization, we struggle to get early enough BA engagement on projects. Often the project manager decides the analysis approach and imposes unrealistic deadlines. What can we do to prevent this?
If you find a solution to that, let me know. I mean, the early engagement is a really, really big topic, and that's probably the topic of a whole webinar on its own. I would say that getting credibility with stakeholders is key. Networking with people throughout the organisation to ensure that they know what the BA role is key, and getting airtime with everyone from the CEO to the stakeholders to everyone in the organisation to really sell the benefits of what analysis and what this sort of process can bring. And once you get a foot in the door and you can actually show them, that's when it really starts to work. It's because people see that there's less project failure, that there's less scope creep, because everyone's on the same page from the beginning. So it's really a self-fulfilling cycle, if you like, but it starts with that credibility and that foot in the door.
Thanks. Question from Andy. Isn't it worth adding strategic alignment to the concept form?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are many ways of doing that. There's a kind of linked document section, but yes, absolutely. Making sure that the project is actually aligned to the stated strategy of the organisation is a really important part. And do you know what? I'm going to take that away and make a tweak, because I've traditionally done that through one of the free text boxes, but it's so important. And of course, that creates some other interesting conversations, because if the project isn't in line with stated strategy, then there's two options, or at least two options. One which is we need to can the project because we're going off on a tangent, or is this an opportunity to revisit strategy? Does it has the market changed around us? Really, really valid point. Thank you for that.
And another question for you, Adrian. Can I get a copy of the project concept document template that was shown in your presentation?
Yes, I have a blank one, and if anyone would like it, if you drop me an email to the email address shown, I'll send a copy over, and you are more than free to share that with your colleagues and people in your organisation. Definitely, yes, I can definitely do that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Adrian. We just check. I think we're done with the questions unless we get any in the next...
Can I just do a very quick shameless plug?
Of course, go for it.
Okay, so as well as speaking at the BA Conference Europe, so if you are coming, please do come see me, say hello. My company runs training courses, and one of the areas that we particularly focus on is pre-project problem analysis. So if you or your organisation are interested in sort of seeing this process, this structure in more detail, I'd be happy to talk about that.